Welcome to Season 2 of the Changing Earth podcast with Sara F. Hathaway, blending survival fiction and fact to bring you entertaining education that will help you dream, survive, and thrive. And now, here's your host, Sara F. Hathaway.
Hi, and welcome back to the Changing Earth podcast. This is episode 41. Last week was our 40th episode, and this is episode 41, season 2, episode 6. Last week in the Without Land story, Erica and Vince finished their meeting with Matthew, and they're now headed back to their home in the refugee camp. So we're going to get to explore a little bit of this camp, see what they have going on here, and with us today to talk to us about aquaponics systems is Ken Jensen. Ken Jensen is the host of the Prepper podcast, and he writes the Clever Survivalist blog. I don't want to explain too much of the reason why Ken's here because I think it'll kind of give away the story. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the Without Land story. Without Land by Sara F. Hathaway. Chapter 6. The couple walked back to the brightly lit lobby. It glimmered in the afternoon sun. They pushed open the heavy glass doors and exited onto the bustling street. There were no cars, but there were folks on the streets attending to their daily tasks. As clean as they were after the meeting with the landlord, Erica and Vince could blend into the crowd better. It was obvious they were out of place, but at least they didn't look like dirtballs in a sea of cleanliness. Erica looked down onto the corner and saw the dilapidated bus sitting there, waiting. "It's such a nice afternoon. Why don't we just walk home?" Vince suggested. "Sounds good to me," Erica replied. It wasn't very often they could just meander around together with no particular time frame to fulfill. It was hot, sunny, and dusty, like most days, but it was just the two of them, and they wanted to enjoy it. The two walked down what used to be the strip of Las Vegas. Vince and Erica had come to the city before the quake, before it was a gated community. Erica had been a participant in a taekwondo competition. Vince and Greg had tagged along to support her, help with the driving, and enjoy themselves in the city of sin. Erica thought fondly about the huge buildings that once towered here. They had dazzled her eyes, beaming with neon and LED lighting. Erica and Vince had gasped at the spectacular water shows of unbelievable scale and grandeur that made the tourists ooh and ah and wonder. Erica remembered how the people had lined the streets both day and night, amused with drinking, casino gambling, larger-than-life stage shows, prostitution, and breathtaking amusement rides for children and adults. She thought about how this town had been a playground for the wealthy, with fine dining restaurants boasting the latest delicacies and sweets that could tickle the fancy of any person of status. Now, looking out over the city as they walked along, Erica could only see a faint shell of the former city of wonder. There were some buildings surrounding the Luxor that had been rebuilt to some kind of usable condition. It wasn't very glamorous from the outside, but Erica wondered what the inside condition was like. Most of the landowner stores and restaurants were in there, and one was clearly set up for the military personnel housed within the city. The rest of the buildings that had composed the strip had been gutted. They had not been that badly damaged in the quake, but the chaos that had raged on the streets following the quake devastated what had remained. Vegas had kept its power on, even after the quake, due to the unwavering strength of the Hoover Dam. But many cities had not. People flooded in, and with the world oil trade obliterated, the supplies stopped coming. Food ran out and people panicked. Many died in battle with one another over the last remaining scraps, and many more fled the city, only to find a devastated country that could offer little help. The government had instituted martial law immediately following the devastation, but their resources had been spread out across the world. It took them years to get most of the country back under some kind of control, but it did not take them long to realize the value of the city that still had power and water in the middle of the desert. Quickly, they swooped in and took over control from the factions that were dominating the city sects. The climate refugee camp was established and filled with any of the city dwellers that posed a problem. And the rest of the people were organized into the network that ran the climate refugee work system. There were minimal housing, restaurants, and stores rebuilt for them to get started on the program. They had been a thriving little community ever since. Erica and Vince had to walk south for a couple of blocks before they reached the street in the landowner's gated community, which led to the road where the gate was to return to the refugee camp. As they turned the corner, Erica broke the silence. "Those meetings are never going to work, Vince." "I know," Vince admitted. They continued to meander down the street. On one side of the road was the southern edge of the airport. The other side was lined with massive warehouses that had been rebuilt from the city that used to exist here. Most of the warehouses that were reconstructed with any kind of care were located on the landowner's side of the containment gate. But there were some built on the refugee side as well. The railroad ran right through the middle of these warehouses so the goods could be easily loaded and unloaded from the train. Steam engines ruled the day again. Then why do we bother going at all? Why put the kids through that? Erica wondered as they stared aimlessly at the buildings they were walking by. These were storage buildings used to house clothing and materials that were salvaged from the western United States. Erica had watched week after week as truckload after truckload came in to fill these warehouses. She often pondered the state of the outside world and where they were collecting all that stuff. Matt came to me personally at the gardens the other day and said this one was a great opportunity. I thought since he himself came, maybe it really would be different. But no, same old, same old. The next door houses were used for food that was donated by the landowners or grown at the gardens on site. "I'm done, Erica. I never want to go again. But I don't know how else to get us the heck out of here," Vince moaned. "Don't you want to stop by the gardens?" Erica asked. They were passing by the spectacular buildings that had been built to house the food-producing aquaponics systems. Their importance was paramount to both the landowner and refugee side of the camp. These buildings were 90% of the reason anyone could still live here. Row after row of them were behind the ones that were on the main road. Their metal frames and sparkling glass shined in the sun. They had been carefully planned and no resource was spared to erect their frames. Everything about them was meticulously cared for and monitored. This was also the place that Vince came to work daily. "Nope, I've got the day off and I'm spending it with you," Vince teased, giving her a tickle in her side. "Oh, lucky me," Erica said, acting coyly. The next warehouse they passed was an eating station, or the place they actually ate the food. It was quite different from where they grew the food. These ragtag buildings were made to resemble a cafeteria of sorts. Buildings just like this one were scattered throughout the refugee camp. This one was only used for refugees who had positions in the gardens or other warehouses during the day. The last warehouse they had to pass made Erica cringe every time she passed it. It had been built here for a reason. The refugees eating at the food station had to look at it and be reminded of what happened if you stepped out of line. It was an ugly place of steel. It was designated specifically for solitary confinement of difficult refugees. Erica remembered painfully her days spent there. No one was going to get out of control and start a fuss here. The refugee camp's inhabitants were told their placement here was for their own survival. With less land and so many people, the government had to put strict population controls in place. Erica deeply resented the fact that in a free country, the refugees never had a say in the policy that took away her children's ability to reproduce. 4 years ago, it had been decided and voted upon by the landowners. A quick scratching of a pen and a few signatures had signed the sterilization bill into law. Anyone not currently entitled to land and over the age of 13 was surgically made sterile, and any children younger than the age of 13 would be sterilized when they had their 13th birthday. She and Vince and the rest of the refugees had rioted fiercely, but they were silenced by the oppression of the guard. They had been no match for showers of pepper spray raining down on them. They were trapped like animals and eventually had to relent to the power of the landowner-backed soldiers. Her family had been separated, and she and Vince had been put into small metal boxes. Her children were put into a metal room. Erica had never been so assaulted. The blood from her wounds during the battle encrusted her skin, and the airless space compressed her body into a lifeless blob. Even though it was November, the heat was still the final weapon of disaster, and it had crushed her spirit into a fine powder ready to be blown away in a slight breeze. The endless chatter of an unknown soldier told her over and over, day after day, how she should behave. His voice ate into every pore of her body. She finally relented to the noise and told the unknown man what he wanted to hear. And then she stood before Matthew's pompous face and told him she would no longer be so rebellious. Those refugees who did not were left to die in the boxes. She was utterly ashamed and humiliated. The soldiers came and took anyone over the age of 13 off to the doctors, who did their work. A tear streamed across Erica's face as she thought of the mass grave they had made for all those people who had resisted, friends she had plotted and planned with, fellow Americans who were ready to stand up for their freedom no matter what the cost. Plus, the pain of losing their family bloodline stung deeper than she could imagine. She quickly wiped the tear away in hopes that Vince would not notice. She couldn't help but marvel at how quickly their freedoms had disappeared when tragedy struck. She hoped there were still people out there, somewhere, fighting the system. Erica and Vince had survived, but they feared they would never really live again. Since Erica had her children, she had always wanted to eventually see her grandchildren. She knew that if they stayed in this system, that would never happen. Daniel would turn 13 and then off to the doctors he would go. Vince kept his mind off the issue by contenting himself with the plants in his gardens. But he resented the fact that he, as a man, was unable to care for and protect his own children. He couldn't stop them from altering his babies. And now, he knew as well as Erica that he would never see his grandchildren. The hatred and frustration had grown through his heart like a vine cracking its way through the concrete. But he was very careful about guarding that side of himself. He had to appear like the helpful garden man, here to do a good job and keep everyone happy. This is one grand picture I have painted here of what they could do with Las Vegas to begin housing these climate refugees, because people would need someplace to go, and you'd have to develop some kind of system or you really would have anarchy in the streets. So that's really what this book is about, the constant struggle between how do we handle such a severe crisis and, what kind of sacrifices do we have to make that happen? And then what are you willing to give up and do to make that happen. So really interesting concept, and there's lots of ways that this could play out. I mean, this is just my vision of kind of a worst case scenario. And as I mentioned in the past, it's kind of my ode to big government and the fear of it getting out of control. So here today to talk to me about aquaponics systems and how they work and how we can make use of them both today or in the event of a natural disaster or a long-term survival situation is Ken Jensen. As I mentioned, he's the host of the Prepper Podcast, and you can find him at www.theprepperpodcast.com. Ken is an American ex-military patriot that is knowledgeable and experienced in electronics and industrial electrical design and maintenance. Ken is also an experienced nuclear reactor operator and also worked on nuclear instrumentation. He grew up hunting, camping, and spending time outdoors. In adulthood, Ken has spent many years learning wilderness survival and eventually urban survival. Ken is the author of a book, The Honey and the Bee, and is the main author and contributor to the Clever Survivalist blog, Survival Guide, and the Prepper Podcast, Survival Podcast. So let's go ahead and welcome Ken to the show. Thanks very much for joining me today, Ken.
Sarah, I am extremely happy to be here on this beautiful, beautiful sunny day in Tennessee talking to you.
Awesome. Yeah, it's nice and sunny here in Cali, too. So we're looking forward to that summertime coming in. Lots of work, though. So in this chapter of Without Land, Vince and Erica are walking back to the refugee camp through the heart of what is Las Vegas, and they're passing along all these buildings, and Erica's kind of explaining, the narrator's kind of explaining what these buildings are and what they're all about. So Vince's role in this camp is he is in charge of these communal gardens. And these buildings are very important. They're meticulously cared for because it is all about the food system. And they use a system in there called aquaponics. So is aquaponics a viable survival system looking at a long-term survival situation?
I would say looking at long-term, aquaponics is an extremely viable system if it is built absolutely correctly.
Okay. So I've heard a lot of back and forth about the different energy requirements for it and the different, mostly about the energy requirements of how that could be a challenge. So what is aquaponics and why do we need to know about this as survivalists?
Okay. So, Sarah, you and I have a long history of going extremely long with these.
Yes.
So I have a lot of information to give you, and I'm just going to throw a lot of it at you. So aquaponics is the marriage of hydroponics and aquaculture. Okay, in hydroponics, you're cultivating plant life in a bath of nutrient-rich water solution, essentially a bunch of chemicals thrown into the water to give you exactly the nutrients required in those plants instead of soil. So what that allows for is large-scale production in a smaller area. Now, aquaculture is a design to grow fish or aquatic life like shellfish, crawfish, snails, or other items. All right, so this helps meet with the fish demand. There are a lot of people that love a lot of fish, and you can get top dollar on fish these days. So you can meet this popular demand with very little impact on the overall aquatic population in the oceans and in the rivers by using aquaculture. Well, introducing aquaponics. Aquaponics is a marriage of aquaculture and hydroponics. Okay, so we're going to use fish that provide nutrient content for the plant life. In aquaponics, we're getting rid of all those agrochemicals that are being used in aquaculture from typical farming. Problems, we have problems in the delta of the Mississippi right now where there's actually not plant life. Usually, or animal life for that matter. I mean, there is life there, but it's not thriving like it once was. The problem in the Delta is all the chemicals that get washed away from the fields in cotton country and Mississippi, in Alabama, Arkansas, all these different states. All these chemicals are leaching into the groundwater, into the rivers, going into the Mississippi, and now the Delta, which used to be where, it's mostly brackish water, that's usually where you have the most diversity of life. You have all kinds of stuff there, but we have a problem. Some of that stuff is disappearing, and you don't hear about it on the news. Well, aquaponics gets rid of a lot of these problems. So, wetland, instead of being turned into an habitable area, we can turn it back into the wetland that's thriving, full of life for us to have more food.
That's awesome. I heard a very interesting history lesson from Rick Austin when I interviewed him, and he was explaining about how all the chemicals a lot of the chemicals that we have came out of World War II, and they used to be bomb-making chemicals for, like, chemical warfare and things like that. And that was a real eye-opener on, that just the history of those chemicals that we don't really know, and then what did we think was going to happen when we just dumped them all into our environment.
Well, these days, if you eat soy or if you eat corn, you're essentially eating Agent Orange.
Yeah. Yes, that's what he was explaining. I was like, that is disgusting. And why do we not know the history about that? We're allowing companies like Monsanto and things like that to thrive off of these farming techniques. And we wonder why our cancer rates are skyrocketing.
Yes, you're not hearing about it because companies like Monsanto have every single person that makes laws in their back pocket. And when somebody like you or I we start talking about it, we have a very niche community that loves to listen to it and loves to talk about it. But anybody in the mainstream media is going to make you or I look like someone who has gone a little bit of cuckoo, you know?
Right, the wingnut.
Because if they show the strategic planning that we do, the down to earth way that we tackle problems, then they give us validity as preparedness individuals. They give us validity, and they can't do that because if they do, they're losing all of their clientele to us.
Right, and all their funding from these lobbyists like Monsanto and these big chemical companies.
Right.
So, Ken, what kind of materials would we need to set this up? Is this something we can do on our own at our homesteads? Is it, it might not be the best idea for an apartment, I'm thinking, but so what, how big is this system? What are we talking?
Okay, so there are lots of aspects of these systems. There is a lot to understand. So I'm going to go over the system as a whole and the main way that people are using a system today, and I will kind of wrap it up and and kind of give you an idea of some ways that I like to think of it being done for a post-collapse scenario.
Okay.
So in a typical aquaponics system, the components that you're going to hear about are the rearing tank, the settling basin, the biofilter, and the hydroponics subsystem, and the sump, the water pump, an air pump, and a bell siphon. And half the people that are listening probably just thought, what the crap is he talking about? Because every single one of those, nobody, if you aren't in aquaponics, nobody knows what the heck the biofilter is. And what is a bell siphon? Who comes up with these names? So anyways, the rearing tank, that's essentially just a fish tank. Okay. It is a tank for raising and feeding fish. You can make a rearing tank out of a large barrel or a stock tank, just a glass fish tank, anything like that. When I say stock tank, we're talking big. I'm talking the 1,500-gallon stock tanks that you can buy from Tractor Supply, that kind of thing. You could make a really big aquaponics system out of one of those. Now, the settling basin, this is where we're going to catch the uneaten food and detached biofilms and stuff like that, and it settles out all the particles. Hence the name settling basin.
Is that the nice way to say fish poop?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot more to it. In the biofilms, there's a lot more to it.
Okay.
But your fish poop is actually going to be very good in the biofilter. The biofilter is where nitrification bacteria can grow, and they can convert ammonia into nitrates. All right? And you can make one of these just out of a bucket full of pebbles. You want high surface area in these things. A lot of people like to use lava rocks and stuff like that because these lava rocks are very porous and they have a lot of surface area. So you have all the surface area that the bacteria, and we'll talk more about the bacteria later, but you have all this that the bacteria can attach to. So the more bacteria that you have, the better you can process your fish poop.
Okay.
Right? It is not absolutely necessary with a good grow bed to have a biofilter, but you have to be paying attention to your concentrations. You have to watch it. A biofilter is kind of like the Band-Aid for a sickness. You put a Band-Aid on it, and it's going to allow it to keep going. But in our case, a biofilter allows us to make things easier on ourselves.
It's like the safety system.
Yeah, the biofilter, it does. It allows us that margin of error. Okay. When we start, when you have a healthy biosystem in there, you have everything in its proper place. Everything's going to work properly. And if you do everything properly, you will never need this biofilter because the bacteria is going to occur naturally in the water anyways. The biofilter is just allowing us to keep more of that bacteria because we are idiots and we are completely busy and we don't take care of our fish and we don't take care of our plants, but they expect them to do everything for us.
Right.
So our biofilter is going to do that heavy lifting for us at many occasions.
Okay.
So the next is the hydroponic subsystem. All right, the hydroponic subsystem is where the plants are going to grow. This is also called the grow bed. All right, you can use like a flood table. You can frame it above a fish tank. You can use half barrels, barrels just cut in half, open with the open part up. You can even use bathtubs. I've seen somebody use a bathtub once. So people get very creative with these systems. All you really need is a bunch of tanks. All right. With the sump, this is going to be basically the lowest basin where the water gravity flows into. All right. It's pumped back up into the rearing tanks from the sump. All right. So the sump can be considered part of the rearing tank if you do it properly.
Okay.
You have a water pump. This is the reason why preppers hate aquaponics. And this isn't necessary, and that's not necessarily a bad argument. They have concerns that are completely valid. But there are aquaponic systems that don't require a water pump. But the typical aquaponic system that will allow you the maximum efficient growth of fish and plants is going to have a pump. And typically it is a mag drive pump, a centripetal type pump. All right. You've probably heard me say centripetal before when you and I were talking about all the different types of generators for micro hydro.
Right.
Okay, so this is a mag drive style pump. You can also use a submersible fountain pump. I've used one of those before. So you're going to pump from the fish tank to the grow bed.
Okay. So the water that we're putting into the grow bed, is that just coming straight out of the tank and then going, being fed across that flood table?
Okay, so let me kind of. I need to keep it as simple as possible.
All right.
Because I don't want to tell everybody that I would recommend them do the typical type of aquaponics. But as you add new water, what I typically want to do with new water is I want to pour it into a container and I want to let it sit for a while. All right. And if you can, you put like fish scales and stuff like that in the water and let it sit for just a little bit. I say a little bit, maybe a week. What you're doing is you're allowing that bacteria to grow into that water a little bit, the bacteria that's healthy. And you could also just fill it up with pond water.
Okay.
Okay. So this water you can just put in a tank that is going to trickle into your system. You don't typically try to make up water except to make up for your losses. So it's not a big concern on how you're putting your water in there as long as you're not creating thermal shock and you're not putting a lot of chemicals in there. Okay? So essentially the system is basically there's more to it, but it's basically two tanks. You have one tank with fish, and from that tank, you've got a sump that is collecting all the debris at the bottom. And from that bottom tank, you're pumping up into your grow bed.
Right.
And your grow bed has whatever media that you chose. And from the grow bed, it's going to bell siphon down back into your fish.
So it does have a media. It's not like the bare roots, like on a hydroponic system. You're putting some kind of dirt or something for your plants to grow in.
When I say media, I mean like rocks.
Okay.
That kind
That's
of
what
thing.
I was wondering.
Yeah, that's a very good media to use even in hydroponics. So we're not using dirt. All right. But I skipped the biofilter. The biofilter is typically in between the fish and the grow bed. So I talked about it was bell siphoned down into the fish tank. Well, a bell siphon, you can look on Amazon and it's like $30, or you can make one from PVC components. They're very simple. It's essentially just a raised pipe sticking up out of the bottom of the grow bed tank. Okay? It's a raised pipe, and it's got a bigger pipe over top of it. The bigger pipe has holes drilled in it. And then there's a medium-sized pipe in the top with an airlock on top of it, making it float. Okay, so you know how a pipe, if you put it down in water, or if you put your finger over the tip of a straw and push it into the water, you know that you trap that air into the straw.
Right.
That's essentially how this is working. We're trapping air into this medium-sized PVC pipe. And as the water level rises and it gets to a certain level where it can raise up this medium-sized pipe, it moves out of the way. The water goes through the hole in the big pipe. The main reason for the bigger pipe with holes drilled in it is to keep the media from flowing through your bell siphon. Okay?
Okay.
So that's basically just a guard. The real meat of what's going on here is that medium-sized pipe that has a cap at the end of it to hold air. That medium-sized pipe is basically just floating up and down in the water. And as the water level rises, it opens up and the water goes through until it gets to a certain level where it recedes. Okay,
that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully I'm breaking this down enough where people can get a little bit of a visual. You know, you just Google aquaponics systems in the image search, and you can find just about anything that you want. But if you pair it up with the descriptions that I'm giving you now, I bet you could probably go out next week and just build yourself a full aquaponics system.
Yeah, I think it'd be sweet because you know right where your fish is coming from. You know, they're so worried about all the radioactive contamination and everything nowadays that it's nice to know right where it's coming from. Then you've got your beds that are fed with the natural ingredients. Can you this is probably a little bit off subject, but can you take out of that biofilter plant fertilizer you could use on other plants in your garden and whatnot?
So if I heard you correctly, the question is, could you take media out of the biofilter to act as basically a vitamin source for plants elsewhere?
Yes.
I would not do that. You could, I'm sure, but I would say that its most efficient use is in that system that you built.
Okay.
What I have done is take some of the media, the gravel or whatever, out of the biofilter and put it into another biofilter for a new system.
Oh, to get it started.
Yeah, you're supercharging it with the bacteria already.
Right. All right, that makes sense. So how practical is this system for long-term survival, Ken? Like, what are, the energy requirements are the big ones, and that's for your pumps and things like that. So, how realistic could we set ourselves up well for this on a long-term basis?
Okay, well, in survival situations, you may have issues achieving recirculation in water temperatures due to the fact that this thing's probably not in an air-conditioned room, and it probably doesn't have power unless you have a super electrician with you. You may lose energy for the inputs to your pumps. So now you have no recirculation, and now everything freaking dies.
Right.
So a single failure point in an aquaponics system, and you could lose all of your fish stock and all of your plant stock. And now you're up Crap Creek without a paddle.
With no paddle. Yes, sir.
Absolutely no paddle. And you don't have a trolling motor because guess what? You didn't have the electricity to charge it.
Right.
So I will go more in detail just because for a long-term scenario, I kind of want to give them an idea of there's more to this. All right. So there are different applications to grow plant life. All right. This could be considered like the same as a hydroponics tank.
Right.
So this is the one that I really like. Deep water raft aquaponics. The plants float in styrofoam rafts in a deep basin. You have recirculating aquaponics or closed loop aquaponics. You have, recirculating is basically just the water's constantly recirculating. In some hydroponic beds, you don't have a tank that they sit in or a bed that they sit in. They sit in a pipe and the water just goes right on by.
Right.
All right. So you can kind of do that with aquaponics as well. You have solid media, which is gravel or clay in a container. The container is flooded with the aquaculture water, and this is best for beginners. This is the reason why it's the typical type. It's best for beginners because it's easier to learn because you have less chance of killing everything. All right?
Right.
There are less parts. Even though what I told you seemed pretty complicated, there are less parts to it than other types, so it's cheaper. All the parts you can make yourself, and you can make them with just barrels out of your backyard.
Yeah.
And then the media bed mechanically filters all the solids and stuff like that. It performs mineralization, which is breaking down the solids, and biofiltration. That's all the media that's in that bed. So this is exactly what I was talking about when I said you don't even have to have a biofilter. The media bed pretty much does it all by itself as well. So reciprocating aquaponics is flood and drain aquaponics or ebb and flow aquaponics, which is where the flood and drain, this is basically the simplest one, period. It's easy to build. It's small. You have a 1-to-1 ratio in this one. Typically, it's the grow bed to the fish tank. So your size is going to essentially be 1-to-1.
Okay.
It's got easier maintenance, and it uses the same media as the solid media, but it's flooded and drained using the siphon drains instead of constantly having flowing water. One that you've probably seen being in magnificent California is vertical tower aquaponics. You've probably seen that outside of some yuppie restaurant where they're growing their tomatoes.
Right.
And they're typically doing it more for the look than they are for the actual use of the tomatoes, although they do get use from those tomatoes. So the vertical tower aquaponics is pretty obvious. It uses vertical towers that are trickle fed from the top.
Right.
And then you have nutrient film aquaponics. Nutrient film aquaponics. This is like a sloped bed. It's typically like a sloped bed of 1 to 1 or 1.1 to 1.4, 1.1 to 1.4% grade, and the flow is typically around 1 liter per minute. Plenty of root oxygen, water, and nutrients available in this type of system. All right, so are you dumbfounded yet?
Yep, feeling pretty dumbfounded.
Okay.
There's a lot of systems out there.
If you're not dumbfounded enough as it is, let's go into the animals. You ready for this?
Yes.
This is actually going to be a little bit quicker. All right. The typical animals, and this is in the rearing tank, they're usually freshwater fish or life. All right. Tilapia is the most common because it is the easiest to do and has a lot of meat yield.
Uh-huh.
All right. And you can do silver perch, ill-tailed catfish, jade perch. You can do Murray cod or, just about any type of cod. Goldfish. Did you know that people eat goldfish?
No, I did not know that.
Yes, goldfish is edible. And actually, I believe goldfish is considered in the same family as, I believe it's the same as, it's a type of perch. No, I don't think it's perch. Anyways.
I know they have no stomachs, so you have to make sure they're fed more often. You can't just feed them one big meal.
Right. Yeah, if you feed them one big meal, you'll kill them.
Right. That's what happened to my son's goldfish.
Yeah. So with the goldfish, though, they are edible and they will get huge.
Right.
They will get huge. And they have a lot of bones in them, and there are a lot of small bones. That's why people don't like to eat them. but they are a fairly resilient fish whenever it comes to growing them in these beds.
Okay.
Another one is koi. You can do koi in one of these beds as well.
Right.
And if you're like me, not like you, Sarah, you're in California, but if you're like me in Tennessee, where the winters are freezing, you feel like you're in Wisconsin during the wintertime, but you feel like you're south of Texas in the summertime in these wonderful temperate climates, but you don't want to have to maintain your water temperature at all, you can just do bluegill or many bluegill.
Mm-hmm.
And many different types of catfish. Okay, so those are the really good ones that they are less susceptible to temperature changes.
They are.
I do have some really cool ideas. I don't want to go into those right now because this is going to go long anyways. And I told you
that you weren't going to.
Told you that let's limit the time.
The bluegill is a great idea. They're a pain in the butt to clean when you got a whole bunch of them, but
Well, the day that you're eating it, you're starving to death.
Right.
Like, wow, I've got a plate full of bluegill. You're going to be thinking you're lucky stars.
Oh, fair enough. So, pros and cons. We kind of went through them. What do you think, like, the best pros for this system are, best cons, and then let's wrap it up.
Well, the best pros is you have everything in one place. Everything's right there. You can go vertical with the system, and you can make use of your vertical spaces to do more productivity. Okay, you have a lot more functionality there for high yield production. Now, as far as post collapse, we already talked about the cons. The cons is you're going to lose power. If you lose power, you lose flow. So now you've got to have some way to maintain flow. And I don't know about you, but I'm not going to sit out there riding a bicycle or doing something like that trying to get flow into my tanks.
Absolutely.
However, if you have a battery bank and a wind generator or water generator and you connect that up to your tanks, you can use your generator to charge your batteries while you're moving the pumps in your tanks. And whenever your generator goes out, then you can use relay logic, and it's going to turn on the battery bank to keep flow going to your tank while your main wind source is gone. Okay. That is not the kind I like. That is so complicated, so ridiculous, and nobody's ever going to want to do that. So you know what the best... Remember me telling you that you could grab pond water straight out of the pond and put it into your fish beds little bit by little bit? Why can you put pond water in there?
It's already got your bacteria and everything in there.
Oh, it's already got your beneficial bacteria.
Right.
You're taking me exactly where I want to go here. You've got your beneficial bacteria. So if you have a pond full of fish and you decide that you want to put a flotation type grow bed on top of your pond, connect those beds with ropes, and float them out to the center of your pond.
Yeah.
Does it not seem like that would be a much easier way to do things?
Absolutely. You could just have the pond with your plants put on. That's how the Mayans and the Aztecs used to do it as well.
Yep,
so
and that's exactly where I got that idea from.
Yep.
See, there you go. You ruined it. I looked like an all-star, and now I just look like an average person.
Nah, I've just done a lot of research on it myself, well, not on the aquaponics, but on ancient civilizations and stuff, because I research, why civilizations fall and things like that. It all goes into the fictional books, but, it's always fun. It keeps my mind tantalized, so excellent. Well, that is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, that's the way to go, because it's the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, you just need a pond then. You flow your plants out on top of it. Bang, you don't even have to worry about all the water feed and the this and the that. It's an excellent idea.
Yep, and if you want to keep your pond aerated, you wanted to keep you just wanted to keep everything go a little bit step forward. You ever heard of the term lagniappe?
No.
Lagniappe is a Cajun term, and I may have said it incorrectly, but I got a lot of family in Louisiana, and they're probably going to slap me for saying it that way.
I know that feeling.
But lagniappe is a little bit something extra. So if you just want to do a little bit of lagniappe for your system, then you can put a small fountain in your pond and keep the water circulating,
Right.
keep your fish going, you got your plants going, and now they're probably getting a little bit of spray on top of them as well, which we all know that water spraying on the leaves of your plants is pretty good as long as it's not too much.
Keeps everything cool.
And you've got all this water circulating. So it's essentially like you have your full aquaponics system right there inside of a pond,
right,
where you
can enjoy the nature around it, can enjoy your fish. Yeah, absolutely.
Just think about how relaxing it would be. Let's talk about pre-collapse.
Yeah.
No preppers want to talk about pre-collapse. Let's talk about pre-collapse. You go out there, you have a little bench that you build out of a couple 2x4s. All right. For those that have bad backs like myself, you probably got a big, nice outdoor couch that you put out there, because you don't want to hurt your.
You got your fountain going.
But you're sitting here, you're listening to the fountain go, and you've got all of these plants growing in the middle of your pond, just out there in the middle, and you're just looking out at that and listening to the water. Just think about how relaxing that is.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even take into account, your food that you're getting from it. And that doesn't take into account how awesome your survival could be with it in a post-collapse scenario. There are people that spend tons of money trying to design that type of landscaping just for the water noise.
Right. Just so it's beautiful. You can illuminate the fountain, Yeah, looks like Brock's going to be out there digging me a pond.
Sorry, Brock.
Yeah. We'll see how that one goes. Well, Ken, that about takes care of it for today. We got to wrap it up because we want to get as much info in as fast as we can and not keep everybody hanging on. But very good explanation of the system. You can definitely picture on how it would work, what it's about for people who had no idea. And then, breaking it down to as simple as build yourself a pond and you can make it happen right there without all these pumps and filters and, everything going. It sounds like there's a lot less room for error in that system to me.
Right. And if everybody wants a little bit more information, this is a plug, but it's not a shameless plug. I did an episode on my podcast. It was episode 48, where I go into a little bit more detail about this as well.
Okay.
I just know that when you and I are talking for an hour, it makes for a really long podcast on your end.
Right. Yeah, everybody's like, I want more story. I'm like, hey, it's not like I'm the author or something, Come on, give me a break. Alrighty, Ken. Well, thank you very much for joining me for this episode. We're going to have you back soon, so I look forward to it.
All right. I'm looking forward to being back on your show. I think it's episode 13 we're going to be doing.
I think you're right.
All right.
Have a good one. All right. Thanks so much, Ken, for coming back on the show this season. Always appreciate having your knowledge to draw from. Some great information. Hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming about what aquaponics is and how it is so viable for long-term survival situations. So I think really for me, the key would be to get that pond going and be able to maintain the fish. And then the plants would come kind of secondary to that because I think you'd have to be able to maintain that fish because that's the food for your plants and all. And also, we didn't really get into this, but, you have to have some kind of feed as well for the fish in that long-term survival situation, which can be a piece of cake, could be bugs or things like that. So just kind of a couple more pointers, something to look into. But some great information that Ken brought us about the hydroponics. And of course, if you want more information, you can head over to his Prepper podcast. I have a link to episode 48 in the show notes for you so that you can go find out more information about it. But I don't know, my son really wants a fish tank, and I know it's too small. Well, I've seen some pretty small setups, but I would like to go bigger if we were going to do something like that. I would like to have a nice large tank with the tilapia. And man, that the pond idea sounds great, but for those of us out here in California, we're kind of at a water shortage. So, and on that note, I want to send a prayer out to everybody who's been affected by the floods in Texas. There's some major flooding going on there, and I want to send out prayers to everybody affected down there. I also want to send out a prayer to my good friend James Hart, who has unfortunately been in the hospital for a little while. It was a medical issue that looks like they have under control, and he's going to be just fine. And like I told his son, he's much too stubborn of a guy to leave us that quickly. So prayers for James Hart down in Texas. If everybody can just say a little prayer for him, that he gets out of the hospital quick and has a speedy recovery. He's got a lot of great plans for the summer, and I'd hate to see him miss out because of medical issues. So prayers going out to Texas, all those affected by the flood, and my good friend James Hart. Lots of love for you. So now let's go ahead and get into review time. It's time for review time. Got an opinion? I'd love to hear it. Go ahead and give me your 2 cents on Day After Disaster or the Changing Earth podcast. Head on over to Amazon or iTunes to give me your 2 cents. So I don't have anything new from iTunes or Goodreads or Amazon. So you might be asking, what are we doing a review time then? Why are we not having a survival tip? Well, the reason why I'm doing review time is because I got an awesome message in on Facebook. This is from Raymond P. And he said, I heard you on a podcast talking about using natural remedies medicines. Just wanted to say, I'm happy to see someone take the time to learn about natural ways. I'm full-blooded traditional native, have been taught the medicines you're learning about since I was a kid. Just wanted to let you know I appreciate you learning about the things so many people have forgotten over time. Please pass on the info to as many people as you can. Thank you. So this could possibly be that he listened to an interview of mine over on the Herbalist Prepper. But it could also be from my podcast, of course, because we've gone through quite a few things. And, wild foraging and herbal medicine is a topic I'm very passionate about. What got me into survival research to begin with, and then, got my feet in deeper and deeper. And so I'm really happy to see that he picked up on this, and I wanted to share it with you about how important it is to really make sure you know what's in your area, but not only what's in your area, but what's in the areas around you. Because if you go just 20 miles, it could totally change, the whole biosystem and what's available for you to eat and what's available for you to feed your family. So this is a highly, highly important topic that I can't say enough about. If we have to deal with the collapse of our system, with the changing earth, like I'm preaching to you about, basically, we've got to know how to work with Mother Earth, and we have to know how to eat what she provides. So, there's things out there that when you walk out your door that can be edible. And when you get a whole bunch of these little things together, they can make a really nice stew. And so I really can't encourage you enough to go out and find out what you can eat outside your door. And not only that, but what do these medicines do for you? What do these plant medicines do for you? How could they help you without going to Western style medicines? How could they be a benefit to your animals, which was a really cool topic that James Hart brought up on a past episode was, there's so many natural medicines for your animals even. We just don't know about them anymore in our Western society. And so I, really wanted to thank Raymond for bringing it up. And man, I'd love to get together with Raymond about some of the things that he knows, because it's so important to get hands-on knowledge from people who know about it, because The books, they can be really misleading, the plants out in the wild don't always look exactly like the picture in the book. So it's important to get with these people who already have the knowledge and build your bank up even bigger. So I know REI a lot of times offers programs on like identification, and your local park system should also offer like hikes, day hikes and things like that, where you can go out with a professional and they can show you which plants are appropriate, which ones aren't. Because a lot of times they have lookalikes that look exactly like that plant, but it's not the one you want. And there's signs to tell you which one is good and which one's bad, but you have to know which signs you're looking for. So, like I say, I can't stress this point enough, and that's why I wanted to bring Raymond's comment to light today on this podcast. So thank you all very much for your time. And remember, until next time, dream, survive, thrive.
Thank you for joining Sara for this episode of the Changing Earth podcast. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Day After Disaster, Without Land, The Walls of Freedom, and Battle for the South at www.author.sarafhathaway.com. If you love Sara's books and this podcast, please head over to Amazon or iTunes and let everyone know by leaving a review.